connects us to institutions? What connects us to institutions? What you find, a major thing that really connects us to different institutions, we're going to bring up in segment 2, which is the concept of social status, which is our place within institutions. Our place within institutions. So social status is really a position that a person occupies, which ties them to a point within the social structure. So you all occupy the social status of a student. You all occupy the social status of a student. And that status really ties you to the institution of education. I occupy the social status of an instructor of sociology. And that ties me to the institution of education. So social status is a position that a person occupies which ties them to a certain point within the social structure. And along with that social status comes social roles. Social roles, which are differing levels of social power, loyalty to social groups, and different expectations or different norms for behavior that are attached to a social status. So if you think about the social status of a student, there is a differing level of social power as a student in comparison to other social statuses within the institution of education. You have a different level of power here at IUP in comparison to the president of IUP, comparison to your deans, comparison to your faculty members. Aside from social roles, there are different loyalties to social groups, right, associated with that status. As a student, you are loyal to other students. You may be loyal to your department. You may be loyal to your favorite faculty members. As a faculty member, there are different loyalties, right, or different associations. And then finally, and I think most importantly, there are different expectations or norms for behavior. Different norms for behavior. Right? Different norms for behavior. In terms of social statuses, you have a lot. Right? You don't just have a social status as a student. You have a social status in almost all of the institutions. In the institution of government, you're a citizen. According to the institution of religion, you may be a member of a religious or non-affiliated member of a religion, or you may be non-religious within that institution of religion. Within the institution of the economy, you are consumers and you are producers. How many of y'all have a job? Anybody have a job here? Let me see the hands high so I can get a poll. Looks about 75% of you have a job, which ties you directly to that institution of the economy. How many of you went shopping this weekend? Anybody go shopping this weekend? Some of you went shopping this weekend. You had a status as a consumer. A consumer this weekend. So there's lots and lots of different social statuses that you occupy. Some of them are given at birth. Some of them are earned. Right? Earned throughout your life. This is the difference between an ascribed status and an achieved status. An ascribed status and an achieved status. So there are positions within society that denote social power, that give you loyalties to different groups, and that associate you with different expectations for behavior that you're born with. And there are ones that you earn throughout the life course as well. So I'll give you a great example of an ascribed status given at birth. Gender. Right? Gender. We are all assigned a gender at birth. It's right there on your birth certificate. Included in that, it has a variety of different levels of social power, different loyalties to social groups, and and different expectations for behavior. You are born into a family as a baby, right? Or as a child within that family. That social status, ascribed, it's given at birth. You're not born an adult, right? Unless you're Benjamin Button. You're not born an adult, right? You're ascribed that status at birth. It has differing levels of social power within the institution of the family. It has different expectations for behavior. And it has different loyalties, right? Different loyalties within the family. This is very different than an achieved status. Achieved status is earned as you move through life. So many of you here are college students, and you're also workers. So there's some different statuses within social structure that are clearly ascribed and clearly achieved. Things like race and gender and age, ascribed, right? Achieved, things like work, right? Your occupational status, your educational status is achieved. What about things like social class? Your social class. Do you think it's an ascribed status or an achieved status? What do you think, sir?
It could be both.
So, riff for me. How could it be both? What do you think?
You could be born into a high social class, or you can get a high-paying job and earn your way into a higher social class.
So you can be born rich, or you can make it rich. So there's one thing, right? Becoming rich, make it rich. What about poor? Is poor a social class? Being poor? Is that part of social class? What do you think, ma'am?
Yeah.
So can you be born poor? Can you become poor throughout your life?
Yeah.
Right. So here's something like social class is both an ascribed status as well as an achieved status. Ascribed at birth. Unfortunately, you can't pick the social class of your parents. Otherwise, I would be Dr. Bill Gates, right, Jr.? I would be choosing that right away. He's not the, I think most probably fun dad. He doesn't look like he's that fun, but his yacht certainly would be fun to play on. So yeah, unfortunately you can't pick your social class at birth, so it is ascribed, but to a certain extent, it can be achieved. We can achieve a new social class higher, like what we want to, being college students, but unfortunately sometimes lower can happen as well. Right? We can move down in social class in relation to our parents over our lifetime. For the importance of thinking and memorizing the concept of status and the concept of roles, I have two simple statements that will help you along the way. You occupy a status, whether it's at birth or whether it's through the life course. You fulfill a role. One denotes being at a certain point or a certain location within the social structure. The other denotes behavior. Behavior that is expected. Behavior that's expected as a result of being at that point within the social structure. So social status is really, really important when we think about, as sociologists, the concept of social structure. There are all these little points throughout these different institutions. Right? Just as at IUP there is a social status called president, there's a social status called vice president of student affairs, as provost, as dean, as a full professor, a distinguished professor, an associate professor, an assistant professor, a senior, a graduate student, a sophomore, a freshman, a junior. There's all these different social statuses that are located within the organization of IUP that are similar to social statuses that are located in universities across the United States and are in relation to other social statuses at other universities, other schools, high schools, middle school, elementary schools, and so forth and so on. So social status gives us a picture of how these institutions are organized. Right? They help us understand that institutions are organized in a certain way. They direct behavior within institutions because each status requires a certain number of roles. Right? A certain number of roles. Different expectations for behavior along with different levels of power and loyalty. So, inside all of us, we can start to think about how we're located very differently across these different institutions. Across these institutions. And what this really turns out to be is that we have many, many different social statuses, which is known as a status set. So if we take the concept of social status as social structure and then apply it to the individual, we occupy an entire set of statuses. A set of statuses known as a status set. A status set. Which is the set of social statuses that a person currently holds within their life. And aside from the status set, we know that there are certain statuses that get ranked higher in terms of their level of importance in comparison to others. So right now, you all, or a lot of you, are workers, and all of you are students. And you can start to think about which one ranks higher for you. Like, which one ranks higher for you? Is your job and your position in your job more important than you as a student? Or is you as a student more important than you and your job? It's a tough decision for a lot of you. I know. I get the emails that say, I gotta work, I can't be in class. You're really ranking your position and your status as a worker higher than your status as a student, at least for that class on that day. Well, there are some statuses that are really most important in the individual. And this is what's known as the master status. The social status that is most important to the individual. And sociologists pay attention to the concept of master status is because first, it tends to be the status that a person spends the most time in. So they tend to spend the most time in their master status. And they also tend to bring the social roles, the associations, and the social power within that master status to other social situations. So the master status is very important in terms of understanding how people behave, why they behave the way they do. I'll give you a great illustration of this. I put up a small version of my status set here. I had a small version of my status set as well as the roles associated with that set of statuses. So it's a status set and its roles associated with that status. Here we can see that I occupy the status of a professor, of a family member, of a golfer, and of a friend. And there are lots and lots of different roles associated with each of these statuses. As a professor, I have to develop content, teach sociology courses throughout the semester. I have to grade assessments, advise students within the major. I have to conduct social research, and then write that research in articles and books. All of that is required as part of the roles of maintaining that status as a professor. As a family member, you can see I got to participate in family activities, spend time cultivating relationships, listen to the concerns of my other family members, provide assistance, and then care and love for my members of my family. As a friend, I have to do nearly the same thing. I participate in activities with friends, cultivate their relationships, listen to concerns, provide care and support, and assistance if necessary. And then as a golfer, how many of you have ever tried golfing? Anybody ever try golfing? Put your hands up high so I can see them. So the vast majority of the class have tried golfing. How many of you find golfing difficult? Yeah, it's not an easy sport. It's not an easy sport. It's actually really, really difficult to learn how to golf. So to be a golfer, to maintain that status as a golfer, you got to practice. Practice a technique. You have to spend time out on the golf course. You know, an average 18-hole round of golf takes 3 to 4 hours. So you have to find 3 to 4 hours, maybe daily or weekly, to practice that technique. It's also costly. Golf clubs aren't cheap. Lord knows, balls are not cheap, right? And I've hit and lost hundreds of dollars worth of them, right? So they're expensive. So you got to buy equipment. You got to pay dues at your golf course. It's not free to go out and golf on a golf course. You have to pay money. And you have to keep up on your game. So if you think about all of these different roles associated with these different statuses, you don't have all the time in a day to fulfill them. So you have to rank them. And so how do statuses get ranked? Typically by virtue of the amount of time that you spend in them. I spend the most amount of time as a professor, right? Spend the most amount of time as a professor, and unfortunately, the least amount of time as a golfer. The most amount of time as a professor, least amount of time as a golfer. And if we want to think about the concept of master status, not only is it the status that you spend the most amount of time in, it also cuts across the way that you will behave, act, and orient yourself towards other situations. So it's not uncommon that when I'm interacting with family members or friends, they tell me to quit lecturing them. Right? Stop being a lecturer. Stop citing all of this scientific research. Stop acting like a professor. Act like a true son, or act like a true brother, or act like a true friend. Sometimes they find it useful. They don't just get annoyed by it, but they come to me with advice. Now, I have friends who have sons and daughters who are getting ready to go to college. They ask me about the college application process. Some of my friends are planning on going back to school. Who do you think they're the first person they come to when they're thinking about going back to school? They come to talk to me, right? And the reason why I will never be a professional golfer is because I spend most of my time fulfilling the social roles of a college professor, which, teardrop, right? But not really. This is just a small part of my life. So you can start to think about your own status set and your own master status, whether that be the status of a student, the status of a worker, and how that impacts your behavior across a variety of different social settings. And if you want to be successful at school, what I would say is ensure that you make your master status that of a student. Because that means that you will, A, spend time in that status, but you will also value the status above all others, and you will be more likely to perform those roles more successfully than if you put the status of a student low in your status set. And I want you to remember, or I want to key this information for you, clue you in if you already don't have this idea. Occupying social statuses and fulfilling the roles that are obligated within those social statuses causes stress. Right? Causes stress. Every status that you occupy requires you to do certain things. Those things take up your time, it takes up your effort, and it takes up your energy. And we, as human beings, only have a limited amount of time in a day. We only have a limited amount of effort that we can give. And we only have a limited amount of energy that we can contribute to fulfilling these roles. And often, what happens is the effort, energy, and time that it takes to fulfill these roles is more than what we can give. Right? More than what we can give. So occupying statuses and fulfilling roles causes stress, right? Causes stress. Just think about it like this. How often, or I should say, we're in the middle of the semester, how many of you are feeling stressed as a college student? By show of hands. Right? When it boils down to it, the stress that you are feeling as a result of being a college student has to do with the amount of energy, the amount of effort, and the amount of time that you have to put into this social status in order to be successful at it, versus the amount of effort, energy, and time that you have to give. The unfortunate thing is, colleges and universities across the United States expect all of your time, all of your effort, all of your energy. We are unrealistic and unreasonable in our expectations for you, which causes stress. Now, stress is not necessarily a bad thing. Not always a bad thing. Stress can be positive, but it can also be negative. Stress can be positive, and it can be negative. That stress, that requirement of you to go farther, to give more of your energy, to give more of your effort and more of your time, can actually push you to greater heights. Right? Can push you to be better people than who you are today. That's what college, if you think about it, that's what your role as a student is all about. You come into the university ill-equipped for the job that you want to get. Right? You come into this university as a freshman, you don't have the training, you don't have the skill, you probably don't have the capacity to fulfill the job that you want. Right? To fulfill the job that you want. And over these 4 years, we push you, we train you, we expect more and more out of you as you move on and through this educational process. And by the end of it, you're going to be equipped with the ability in terms of time, the ability in terms of energy, the ability in terms of effort to fulfill the job that you want to have responsibly and successfully. So stress can be a positive thing. Right? Stress can be a positive thing. It can also be a negative thing. It can be a very negative thing. Too much stress, too much expectation of time, effort, and energy can harm a person. Harm a person psychologically, harm a person physiologically. When too much is expected of you, you may not only be able to perform what you normally perform, you may not be able to perform anything. People in high-stress situations get sick more quickly. People in high-stress situations oftentimes have long-term physiological problems, and they can have psychological problems as well. So stress isn't always a positive thing. It can be a negative thing as well. So sociologists talk about stress in terms of the relationship between statuses. Right? There's all these institutions out there. There's the economy, there's the government, there's our family, there's our religious institution, and then there's our educational institution. And within these different institutions, we have these social statuses. And all of these statuses have competing roles that try to influence our behavior in one direction or another. And they're not all harmonious. Right? It's not a wonderful, harmonious relationship between these institutions. We talk about how institutions can be greedy. Just like college expects all of your time, all of your effort, and all of your energy, if you work, your employer probably expects a large chunk of your time, of your effort, of your energy to be applied towards those social roles. If you are in a family, maybe a mom or dad, or even a son or a daughter, you may have a great deal of responsibilities. You may have to take care of brothers or sisters. sons or daughters, or parents. And that is going to require a large amount of your time, your effort, and your energy. If you are, in relation to the government, you get in trouble with the law. This happens every once in a while. Here at IUP, a student gets in trouble with the law. They may, as a result, have to go to court. They may, as a result, be required to perform community service. They may, as a result, have to pay a great deal of fines for their misbehavior or what have you. And that requires, by law, time, effort, and energy. Right? Time, effort, and energy that's required of you, which will compete with your other social statuses. What sociologists call this is role conflict and role strain. We talk about this type of stress in terms of role conflict and role strain. Role conflict is simply a conflict between the amount of time, effort, and energy between two different social statuses. So the time, effort, and energy that's required of you to fulfill the roles in your work life versus your roles in your school life. And what we find is that the more roles that are required of you, which can be through more statuses or statuses that have a complex set of roles, the more stress you're likely to have. Right? The more roles, the more time, effort, and energy that you're expected to put into any one thing, the more likely you are to have stress. Similarly, role strain has to do with the fact that even within the same status, there can be conflicting role obligations. There can be conflicting role obligations. Meaning the time, effort, and energy that it takes to fulfill one of these roles may come into conflict with the time, effort, and energy that it takes to fulfill another role within the same social status. Right? Within the same social status. So we talk about this in terms of role conflict and role strain. Role conflict and role strain causes stress. Stress can be positive, but it can also be negative. So there's this nice illustration that's included in your book, and I think it illustrates role conflict and role strain pretty clearly. So here we have you, right? Here's you, right up here. There we go. Here's you. And here is your status set. You're a son or daughter, you're a friend, a student, a worker. So you have some very important relationships with the institution of the economy, right, as a worker, the institution of education with you as a student, and then both your role as a friend and role as a son or daughter could largely fall under the institution of the family, right, the family or relations. And there are a set of role obligations that you have to fulfill on any given day. So you can imagine this is a Tuesday. Right? You can imagine that this is a Tuesday. On the same Tuesday, as a son or daughter, you find out mom's in the hospital. So she's not dying, but you know that you have to go visit her, bring her flowers. As a friend, very important date in your friend's life, their 21st birthday, you only get one of those. And it's supposed to be a really wonderful celebration. You're officially becoming an adult in the sense of being able to purchase alcohol. It's no longer a status offense for purchasing or consuming alcohol. As a student, you're expected to come in and prepare for an exam that you're going to have the next day, on Wednesday. And as a worker, your boss calls you up and says, we've lost all of our employees, everybody's called off. We need you to come in. We know that you've already worked 20 hours a week, but we want you to come in for some overtime. What do you do? What do you do? Here are these different institutions that are pushing and pulling on you in terms of behavior. How are you going to behave? Well, sociologists would say one way that we might be able to determine how any given person may behave will be the relative importance that they place on each of these social statuses. Right? The relative importance that they place on each of these social statuses. So for some of you, you may go visit mom at the hospital. You may go visit mom at the hospital. But it's likely that the thought process that occurs has to do with your status as a son or daughter versus your status as a student, your status as a worker, your status as a friend. I care about mom no matter what. I know that she's going to get through this, but it's the most important thing for me to do. I'm going to call off work. I'm going to make sure that, I can tell the professor that I'm not going to take the exam, or I'm just going to do poorly on the exam, and my friends, they can go out and have fun without me. You may place the most importance on you as a worker, right? Mom's going to be fine. She can wait. I'll give her flowers on the weekend whenever I see her. My friends, they can wait. 21 comes around, but the only 21st birthday that I really care about is my own. You as a student, that's all about making money 5 years down the road. I got to make money today. And as a worker, you can say that's the most important. But what you're really doing here is ranking your social statuses, your positions as you are located within these different institutions is going to influence how you behave, what decisions you make in terms of fulfilling your role obligations, which are really behaviors. So you can think about how your relationship to your social environment does, in fact, influence your behavior through the process of role obligations and the fact that we rank our social statuses in terms of their level of importance, typically along the lines of how much time we spend in them and how important we think they are. Even within a single status, right? Even within a single status, we can see kind of conflict occur. So here, once again, is you as a student. And you have affiliations, not just with professors and staff and other members of the employed members of the university, but you also have obligations to your fellow students. Right? So you have obligations to your fellow students. Social statuses determine our loyalties. So here's a situation where you have competing loyalties. Right? Competing loyalties. Your first competing loyalty is to your professor as well as back to yourself. To do well in your classes. Make sure that you get the best grades possible in your classes. That's not just for yourself. That has to do with your loyalty between you and your professor, you and your department, you and the university. We, as employed faculty members, employed staff members at the university, want to make sure that you all do well. That's our goal out here, is to make sure that you do well. But you also have competing loyalties with other students. So we compete with you guys in the sense that not only is there an expectation for you to do well, there's also an expectation for yourself to get along with your other classmates. And sometimes getting along with your other classmates means not doing well, right? Not doing well in your classes. So imagine this, right? You have the choice between doing really well, getting an A on an exam, but getting an A on that exam breaks the grade curve in the class. And that means that everyone does worse in the class because you did well. Right? Everyone did worse in the class because you did well. What are you going to do? Are you going to get the A, or are you going to get a couple mistakes wrong? Right? Get a couple mistakes wrong, or get a couple answers wrong to make sure that the rest of the class does well along with you. Well, for some of you, you may decide that your loyalties lie with your faculty members and with yourself. Others may decide that your loyalties mostly lie with your fellow classmates as well as yourself. right? So this is known as role strain. Role strain. The fact that even within some roles, or some social statuses, the roles either contradict one another or compete with one another for time, effort, and energy in terms of resources. So you all follow me? By show of hands, you follow me with the concept of role strain and role conflict? Very good, very good. So there's lots of theories about stress and social status. Stress and social status. And I'm going to give you two hypotheses about stress and social status. The first is status accumulation. Oops. Status accumulation. Status accumulation theory hypothesizes that multiple statuses actually act as a buffer on self-worth when status exit occurs. So, sociologists recognize that there is stress in performing the social roles, and there's also stress that occurs when we exit a social status. Put it this way, how many of you are a little bit fearful about what comes next after graduation? Raise your hand if you're a little bit fearful about what comes next after graduation. The vast majority of the class raises their hand. Why are you fearful? You were exiting this social status, and you're expected to take on a new status. And there's a little bit of fear associated with that. There's stress associated with status exit. Status accumulation theory says the more social statuses we have, the less stress that occurs when we exit those statuses. We have all of these buffers. So you can imagine, in addition to being a student, if you also have a job, once you leave school, you can say, well, at least I have a job that I can work at until I get into my career. If you leave school without a job, you might be more stressed because not only have you left this status as being a student, you have no master status that you can see for or occupy until you enter that career or get a job. So it says the person with more social statuses will be more psychologically healthy. Get a lot of social statuses, you're going to have a lot of a buffer on that stress. If you think about it, if you lose a job, say you have two jobs and you lose one, it's going to be less stressful than if you have one job and you lose that job. That's really status accumulation theory. More statuses equal less stress overall. Status strain theory says multiple statuses actually cause more stress. So you can imagine with each social status that you occupy, it's like throwing more balls into a juggling act. Right? More balls into a juggling act. As you keep gaining statuses, more balls keep getting thrown in that juggling act, and eventually you start dropping balls. Right? You start dropping balls. And how are you going to feel when you're not performing well at anything? So you're failing at your work, you're failing at school, you're not fulfilling your roles as a family member, right? You lost a job, all because you're dropping these balls. So one says more statuses lead to higher self-worth. The other one says more statuses lead to lower self-worth. So which one is it? Is it status accumulation theory or is it status strain theory? Well, there was a very famous social psychologist and sociologist by the name of Peggy Thoits. She's actually at, I believe, the University of Iowa. She may be at Indiana University, Indiana. She put this to the test. She collected information about important social statuses that people occupy, and then also tested how stressed they were. What was their psychological well-being like? Were they very stressed, or were they psychologically healthy? And what she found is that people who had less than 6 social statuses tended to have lower well-being. So if you have very few social statuses, status accumulation theory holds up. If you have less than 6, you're going to be less psychologically healthy in comparison to a person who has more social statuses than you, up to about 6. And then after 6, status strain theory starts to kick into effect. People with greater than 6 social statuses tended to have lower psychological well-being. So what we learn from Theutz's study in relationship to the individual and social structure is that to be happy in life, to have good psychological well-being, get some social statuses, but don't overfill your plate. Get some social statuses, but don't overfill your plate. The goal isn't to have the fewest number of statuses possible. The goal is actually to have a decent amount of social statuses with role obligations, but not too many. Y'all follow me? So this is a life lesson that you can take home from the relationship between social status and psychological well-being. How you relate to the social structure.